Jeremy Zuckerman's music has always been a standout in both Avatar: The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra. He brings such a unique approach to scoring a fantasy show, incorporating not just Eastern instruments that fit within this Eastern-inspired world, but also other eclectic choices such as the kalimba and American jazz instruments like the saxophone and the trumpet. So today I wanted to dive into the final piece of music from The Legend of Korra and talk about how it pays homage to Avatar: The Last Airbender whilst also being its own unique piece of music. And just for reference, the final piece of music heard in Avatar: The Last Airbender is called The Avatar's Love, and The Legend of Korra's finale music is called The Legend of Korra. So, to avoid confusion with the show itself, I'm going to refer to The Legend of Korra, the piece of music that is, as Korra's finale from now on. I've divided up Korra's finale into 5 sections. Section 1 starts off with a small string section, a vibraphone, a kalimba, a xylophone, and a few other percussion instruments. As a composer, I often feel the need to always incorporate a melody at all times in a piece. But this is a reminder that sometimes simple atmospheric chords can be just as effective, if not more, in accompanying a scene. Listen to how romantic these opening bars sound. Makes me want to visit that Eiffel Tower-esque building in the heart of Republic City. You'll notice the prominence of the kalimba in this piece. The kalimba is an important instrument in the Avatar universe. It frequently appeared throughout the ATLA soundtrack, most notably at the end of the show during the Avatar's Love. In that track, the kalimba is given the safe return motif, which is probably my favorite motif in the entire show. And you know the theme. You recognize this theme. By having the kalimba appear here in Korra's finale, our brains immediately form a connection with ATLA's finale, and I'll talk about why that's important later on. So the piece continues with some lush chords to flesh out the ambience and firmly set us in the key of A. The key of A is symbolic in this context. The Avatar's Love is written in the key of D major. And if you're familiar with the circle of fifths, you'll know that D major is the key immediately preceding the key of A. Just like how Aang is the Avatar immediately preceding Korra. So if Aang's finale music was written in the key of D, then it makes total sense to have Korra's finale music be written in the next key in the circle of fifths, the key of A. And knowing how detail-oriented Jeremy Zuckerman is, I doubt that this was a coincidence. And that's such a cool little detail. It's little things like this that make me love analyzing music. Alright, moving on to section 2, which kicks off with the main Legend of Korra theme being played by the Erhu in an arrangement that is nearly identical to the Legend of Korra end credits theme. These next few bars feature a variation of that theme, this time with the melody being given to the violins. This leads us into section 3, which is a short transition section that again serves as a callback to ATLA. Here we have that safe return motif directly stated here in both Aang and Korra's keys. It first plays in relation to A major, although harmonized with its relative minor F sharp minor, and then in relation to D major. There are a few more bars of transition here before we kick off section 4, which is a refrain of section 2. But this section builds in intensity. I love how Jeremy Zuckerman is able to make this track feel so huge and crescendo to such a beautiful degree with just a string section, an erhu, a kalimba, and a few other percussion instruments. This creates a wall of sound that perfectly complements what's happening in the scene. You feel like you're in Korra and Asami's shoes as you walk towards the spirit portal, being surrounded with all this spirit energy. The visuals, the story, and the music are all working perfectly here. When you have all three of those ingredients, that's when you know you have a special scene on your hands. And to be honest, this is often the point where I start tearing up. I'll talk more about the final coda section in a minute, but first I wanted to address the entire piece as a whole. It's hard for me to describe exactly why this track brings me to tears, but it does. Every single time I listen to it, I'm overwhelmed with so many feelings and I always end up crying. Maybe it's because this piece marks the end of a show that, despite its flaws, I really love. Maybe it's because it feels like this is the last time we'll see the Avatar universe animated on screen. Maybe it's because it feels like the end of an era for me. Avatar: The Last Airbender was such an important part of my childhood. I remember watching the series premiere in 2005. I was 7 years old, and this world, these characters, completely captivated my imagination. I fell in love with the show. And then 7 years later, The Legend of Korra was released and became a pivotal part of my adolescent years. I was fighting my own battles right alongside Korra. To say that these two shows shaped who I am is an understatement. They caught me at an impressionable age, and I'm so glad that they did. These two shows aren't just entertaining fantasy adventures. The reason they've resonated so much with people around the world of all ages is because of how human and real these characters feel. These characters have taught me incredible life lessons. This show has encouraged me to always fight for freedom. This fantasy world, even though it's filled with corruption and forces of evil, just like our world is still a symbol of hope for me. And as I begin to enter my adulthood years, facing, to put it optimistically, an apocalyptic future, I find myself continuing to return to these shows. Maybe I'm just clinging on to my childhood, or maybe I want to believe that things will end up turning out alright, and that I'll be able to share these two shows with my children one day. And I'd be a fool if I didn't address Korrasami in this video. It's hard to underscore just how important this relationship is in the history of animation. For many viewers, this was the first time they saw themselves represented on screen in an animated family show. Sure, you had a few characters here and there that were hinted at, but were never fully explored, and often these would be side characters who had no real bearing on the plot. But here, this is the main character, and this moment is the very last scene of the show, which means that more emphasis, more attention is put on it. Yes, I wish that creators Mike and Brian had a chance to properly develop this romance in the context of the show, but with the understanding that there was a limit to how far Nickelodeon would let them go with this relationship, I think they did a pretty good job with it. And while it is a shame that they were held back then, it is encouraging to see that more family animated shows these days are starting to include LGBT characters. I think Korra should get a lot of credit for that. And hey, at least we get to explore Korra and Asami's relationship in the comics. Alright, tangent over, but there was a reason for all this. Consider this question. Why does it matter that Korra's finale music mirrors Avatar: The Last Airbender's? It's not just for nostalgia. It's because the music has a very important job to do here. It needs to convey a specific message. Given that the writers weren't able to fully develop or foreshadow this romantic moment between Korra and Asami, the music has to do a lot of the heavy lifting here. So by directly referencing and using motifs from the most romantic moment in Avatar: The Last Airbender, Jeremy Zuckerman leaves no doubt in anyone's mind what this moment means. This is a textbook example of a piece of music completely changing the context surrounding it. The music conveys an air of romance. This isn't just two friends walking off on an adventure to the spirit world, but rather this is the beginning of a new relationship. So to finally finish off the piece, let's talk about that coda. Notice that rather than ending on a huge triumphant note the way Avatar: The Last Airbender does, Korra's finale ends on a more quiet note. The kalimba comes back with these slow chords accompanied by a violin quietly playing the tonic above. The chords slowly work their way towards the 5 chord. And I love the way this chord is held. You can feel the tension as you wait for it to resolve. This short coda section is indicative of the entire piece, in that the harmony here isn't anything particularly complex, but that doesn't make it any less effective. Again, as a composer, I often have a bad habit of trying to write overly complex chords just for the sake of showing the listener that I know this more advanced vocabulary. But that is the sign of an amateur. You don't expect your favorite author to write a paragraph jam-packed with SAT words that no one uses. The best writers out there often use simple words to describe pivotal events. And the same is true for composers. You don't just pull out a D flat 7 sharp 11 chord just for the sake of it. Instead, you choose the chord that fits the piece, even if it's considered simple harmony. And Jeremy Zuckerman knows that, and shows us that less is more. And so going back to the coda, when the 5 chord finally does resolve back to the tonic, we're treated to a nice stab in the heart with a final restatement of the safe return motif. In my mind, this motif has always been associated with peace. In the context of ATLA, it often plays when Team Avatar has completed a mission and are safely flying off on Appa. This motif is the definition of resolution, of peace, of being content. And hearing it at the end of The Legend of Korra, that is exactly how I feel. The journey may have been bumpy along the way, but there was so much to love. This motif makes us feel at peace, and it brings us home for the last time. And a big thank you to Elijah Commas, also known as EX Commas, over on MuseScore.com. I used a lot of his arrangement as the basis for my score reductions. And also a big shout out to all these amazing people who did their own arrangements of the track. I cross-checked a few harmony questions I had with these sources. The fact that there are so many arrangements of this one track shows not only how much people love this show, but this track in particular. This is a special piece of music right here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.